Welcome, Adam Sanyago with ModalMinds, back here with Jonathan Bunce, our principal in M&A, to talk about the second part of our three-part series on next generation M&A. The goal here is to really talk about a better approach to capturing value and really addressing the constant statistic of mediocre performance that we're seeing on average across most of the deals that are out there statistically. So, Jonathan, welcome.
Adam, great to be here again.
I think some of the key things that Jonathan has identified through his experience and research was that traditional models still are underestimating the value of effective integration.
Yes, Adam, I think just to recap the chasms, it's typically on the front end we have a financial and market analytics that are done by corp dev, and legal come in for risk mitigation. Then once day one happens, those are typically handed off to a team of some sort, the integration management office, the IMO. More than likely it's an HR kind of role, and they're thrown in, but they have no idea really what the deal drivers were, the negotiations many times they aren't aware of, and so now they're asked to execute this, and implement it. And that's really where the hard work comes in, and that's over the next 2 years that we'll really see the roots and how they take effect. So that's really the chasm one. The second one is it really comes into project management, which is very key, obviously, to it. We have to track everything, but it's more of a checkbox, and it's really not understanding the holistics of the business that goes in there and the executionable analytics that now we have the ability to do. We have some really key software programs that we'll be bringing in that we can, with some high level of confidence that we can achieve these deal drivers we'll get into.
In addition to execution, what are the other overlays to view an integration that's really successful and effective, and maybe your anatomy of a merger integration is best place to start?
So we came up with a model. It's a SIM model, strategic integration model is what it stands for. And we start with the anatomy of the head. And one thing I found in all businesses, regardless, strategy and structure must be aligned. And once those are aligned, and many times they're out of alignment, because it's easy to change a strategy, but it's very difficult to maybe realign or restructure. That's a big undertaking. And so many times companies they understand the environmental impacts that'll cause them to change a strategy, but they don't readjust the structure. So there's not an alignment there. The third component of that is the leadership. Leadership needs to understand the strategy and the structure. And once those three are aligned, then we have to communicate that. Communication is critical in every organization. So I call that kind of the cognitive approach, and that's the head of the anatomy. Then when we get down to the free will, the heart part of it, and so that's really the change management. So if it's properly communicated down to somebody, is I've been made aware of something, right? And once you go through, change management, it's awareness, assessment, and then adoption. And that's the human free will. We were created as human beings with free will. So in an organization, when we hear the new doctrine of the acquisition and where we're going forward with this acquisition in the new co, each individual at every level within the organization makes they're made aware of it. Hopefully the communication matrix was well designed prior to day one of the acquisition, and then they personalize it and assess, well, do I have a career at this company or not? So that's where the natural attrition comes in. That's also where you do trim things, because you have a lot of overlay, and then it's the assessment. So do people really adopt the assessment, after they've looked at it from a personal level? And that's change management. That's the free will. So we have to manage that, and that has to tie back into the cognitive part of it, the head of the SIM model. Then the bottom part is what I call the program management. It's the legs of it. It's time and scope, against a budget. That's your classical, program management. So that's the legs that run it through, because this has to be done in the shortest amount of time.
So help us understand a little bit more on the doctrine. I mean, we don't have to get too ethereal, but I think it's a valid point, because I think we've all seen as integrations go on, leadership may be out of sync, and then obviously that we talk about percolating down, right? That affects the results.
Yeah, I'm just going, to peel the onion back a little bit on that. The doctrine is when there is an acquisition, and there's various acquisitions. You can buy for IP, you can buy for market share, et cetera. There's multifacets of that. But regardless of whatever the acquisition is for, what it's based on, that is the doctrine of the new company. So the new of those two coming together, that is, okay, here is why we bought company A. And now with company A, here's the new company. So I think that part of the misnomer is that the acquiring company, they feel like nothing changes. They feel the change is always for the new kid on the block. Well, that's not true, because when the new kid comes on the block, it changes the dynamic of the existing, the parent company. So the doctrine, there needs to be a new doctrine. Here's why we did this. Here's what value it brings. And the acquiring company has to make that change and embrace it just as much as the acquired company needs to. So change management is for everybody. There's a change in every single transaction.
So part of establishing that strategy and structure, it very quickly goes down to the second layer, which is how do you, A, share that information, and then B, watch it potentially become adopted, or watch people react to it, right?
Yes.
Because of that human will, or the free will you talk about.
The human will, and as we say, if we still stay at the head of it, part of the concern is leadership. Making sure, does leadership, are they fully aware? We've been on numerous deals where the leadership team was pretty fragmented on their understanding of the doctrine, or why the acquisition came through, and how we're going to actually go to market with the acquisition, how we're going to integrate it in. If there's discord at that level between the strategy and the structure and the leadership, well, the fourth part, the communication, understandably, is going to be fragmented. And the communication is going down to the troops that are actually going to do the work. And so if that's coming down fragmented, it's a recipe for disaster. Hence, that's why we see 70% failure rate. It's a very, very complex operation to go through.
Yeah, so we haven't even talked about execution. We're already saying, hey, there's a couple gaps here that if you don't keep your eye on the ball can easily fall apart.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like it's something that you would need to constantly maintain, or at least monitor throughout the course of the exercise, right?
Yes, yeah. And so I think what's really nice in today's world too, we have some very sophisticated tools now, some SaaS tools that we can actually look at the the leadership competencies, the goal alignments, and the team continuity. And that's going to be key and fundamental, and give us a probability towards the business objectives. It aligns those three elements towards business objectives with a probability rate of success.
Let's talk real quickly about the second level on what we call sort of the adoption scale, or the shoulders and the heart of the model. Maybe go through the quick building blocks there in terms of what drives that. If you look at kind of a linear scale, there's sort of an entry point, and then people can kind of move up the adoption ladder, or fall backwards, right?
Fall backwards, yeah. So that's your natural attrition. So, yes, when day one happens and there's an announcement made of an acquisition, and I've been on that. I woke up and all of a sudden it's either read on Wall Street, or you hear it. Somebody calls you, a client calls you, a customer, in a major panic. So what does this mean for us now? So everyone's made aware all of a sudden. Now, the most important thing is, are they made aware clearly and succinctly of what the deal is and how every component is? That takes a lot of detailed planning, once again, back up into the strategy and structure and the doctrine of the deal. And that communication plan takes a lot of time. It's very complex because you need to address several parties, internally and externally: customers, employees, leadership teams, the street, et cetera. I mean, so there's a lot of clients, internally, externally, that need to be addressed in the communication of that. Then as we slide down the scale, so they're made aware of it, but then we have to monitor the adoption. There's nothing we can do about adoption. You can tell me something, and how I take that is how I internalize and process based on my background and who I am as a person, individual, and how I process something to how you process. It could be very different. Sure. Based on your background and your education and upbringing and experiences in life.
My hierarchy of needs, right?
Exactly. It's the Maslow hierarchy of needs. So every individual goes through that. So you can imagine when you bring in 10,000 people new into a 100,000 people existing organization, every individual is going through this sliding scale, this adoption scale that you speak of. And the idea is to get them through there as quickly as possible, because we have to get them to the adoption point to where they personally, it resonates with them. They see a career here at this company. They understand their roles and objectives with the new company, and they can move forward and efficiently and start driving revenue and ROI.
Yeah, so that makes sense. So as they kind of enter in an assessment when they're notified, they start to progress as they assess that further, and then ultimately the end game would be full adoption where they buy in.
Absolutely.
Got it. And obviously that's we talk about integration being kind of organic. It's a sliding scale. It goes back and forth throughout the course of the exercise. And so when we look at kind of the third layer, the piece that we're most familiar with, the integration piece or the integration execution, we understand kind of the task management and the typical anatomy, but what's different in terms of the next generation view? What are some of the key contact points and things to think about in execution as it relates to solving these two chasms?
Well, I think what it is as we're going through the tactical, work of it and the program management of it, we're looking for transformative opportunities that exist. And so those are going to be discovered through people. Once again, as they're churning through it and wrestling with it, and it's scope, budget and time. And so we have to move quickly because you want to get this thing rooted so it can start growing and prospering and hit the business objectives, the outcomes that were outlaid, back in the due diligence. So understanding the charter, a clear charter for it, and having the playbook, which are the traditional measures, but keeping more of that holistic mind, and that comes back to the skill sets of the new practitioners. They're going to understand that we're not just checking the box of traditional program management. We're looking for transformational opportunities, maybe things that we can discover that weren't even thought about in the original due diligence of the deal. And so there's other, value adds that we can bring forth. So it's getting these people to think openly, critical thinking, and open-mindedness. This is where ingenuity comes forward too. And so moving that forward while we're doing, the traditional program management.
Well, I think one of the things that you had mentioned in around this discussion in previous offline conversations was that maybe we don't change the ingredients, but we enhance them or elaborate them. So sounds like what you're saying just now is we're still using a charter, but we're taking it seriously. And one example is I know you like to sign it into policy with kind of the C-suite, and then that ultimately gets shared with all the people on the integration team, right? So they understand, you talk about strategy and structure and then communicating that's kind of a linkage to the top, correct?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely, that's a good point, Adam, too. So there is, I think, accountability is a way to sum it up. And I think many times acquisitions will come, they're literally kind of tossed over to the wall once they understand why they're acquiring it. But I think the accountability all the way up to the CEO and the board level and meeting with them, making them sign off on charters, on changes, if there's some doctrinal changes, governance changes, et cetera, throughout the process is very key. And so it's not just handed off to the VP of HR or, maybe the COO or even CFO. Everybody's involved in this, and we have to see it through all the different roles and the complexities and pulling everybody together for a successful, integration.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that necessarily we're all hands on deck for every single approval, but what it shows is that people understand it. It helps to keep the executive sponsors in alignment, keeps them involved, and then it also shares the message down that, A, we're endorsing, this deal for these reasons, and oh, by the way, you're empowered to, expand and drive certain areas like, enhancing your budget to capture deal drivers, managing your budget to capture deal drivers, or looking for transformative opportunities to really increase the value from either a business or a financial perspective. But again, those are all things that would be documented in standard areas we see: the playbook, the charters, the integration management office and plan. And another thing I think I know you talk about from an execution standpoint to link into the upper areas is really kind of getting involved and pairing integration with the pre-close activities and some of that non-financial discovery and some of the functional due diligence, and make sure that softens the transition to close that gap as well.
Absolutely.
Well, let's get specific in our next session. We'll wrap this one up. The next one we'll talk about really what are some actionable areas where we can start to think about these three levels working together and in sync without creating a lot of overhead, leveraging some tools, leveraging some best practices, and really obviously enhancing communications without making it really a binder and shelf-driven world. We really want it to see something that's lean, effective, and really drives success. Thank you.